Hi, everybody, and a very pleasant evening to you wherever you may be. This is Comfortably Zoned Radio, and it's time for Dodgers Baseball, a tale of two cities, from Brooklyn to Los Angeles. I'm your host, Peter Trunk, and my co-host is Ralph Tyko. How are you, Ralph?
Hey, I'm great, Peter. It's been a while, and I'm glad to be back. We're going to have a rotating thing going over the winter, and I'm excited because I get to be on the air with Peter Trunk, who really, it was you and I starting this whole thing way back, and I'm thrilled. Thank you, Peter, for having me.
Well, you don't have to thank me, Ralph. Always a pleasure, especially when we can talk about the Brooklyn Dodgers and the New York Giants and you and I both the same age. We could heavily talk about the 50s that we saw and the 40s that we read about, et cetera, like that. And
you know,
it's a wonderful thing.
And the times, it doesn't have to be as we've discussed baseball all the time in our discussions, because baseball is a microcosm in any era of what's going on in the world. And I'm reminded of the wonderful book that Charles Einstein wrote called Willies Time. And the chapters were headlined were named after what president it was. And Willies Time went between Hoover, if I'm not mistaken, was the first president when Willie was coming up in Alabama, and went all through Lyndon Johnson. His book really talked much about the times that Willie lived in outside of baseball. And as hectic as the world is today, who'd have thunk that we could look back upon the 50s with all the upheaval of the Cold War and everything as stable times, but they really were by comparison to what's going on today.
Yeah, it is very interesting. I have not read that book of which you speak, Willie's Time, but I've heard about it.
Right.
I don't have it. I've never read it, but I have read other books about the Brooklyn Dodgers and stuff that brought into play, no pun intended, the social aspects of the borough of Churches much more than a strict baseball book would. And, how the population changed and where the people were living and what they were doing for a living and how much they were making and who was middle class and who was low class and who was high class and who was moving out and who was moving in and it's very, very interesting.
And who was
stuff.
afraid of integration, and all that going on, and it was it was just not as peaceful at times as we're led to believe. Go back to simpler times, trolley cars and stuff. But when those trolley cars were going on, there was big depression first, and World War II, and all of it in our parents' history. We're not talking about generations and generations ago. This is it was interesting that I keep this in my head. Your dad was born in September of 1911, if I'm not right, or at least in 1911, same year as my dad was born. So
my dad actually was born in 1903.
Oh, okay.
My mom was born in 1910.
Okay. Well, I misremembered that one too. But let's talk Dodgers shortstops. And we were talking off the air a little bit. We both agree that when by the time the Dodgers won it in '55. Pee Wee Reese, as solid as he still was in 1955, was a bit past his prime, given that he had a lot of tough war years. He wasn't playing ball, but the war was tough on ball players as well. And we wondered what it would have been if Don Zimmer, had not been beaned and had a plate put in his head. He was a great prospect coming up with the Dodgers. Can you tell me something about him that I might not know?
Yes, and I would preface it by saying that Pee Wee Reese was a Hall of Famer, a legitimate Hall of Famer in my eyes, and he had turned 37 during the 1955 season. That being said, the Dodgers won the World Championship, and O'Malley wasn't too concerned that Reese was past his prime. But someone who was staring at it, and perhaps if Branch Rickey was still there, Branch Rickey, Mr. Rickey, was always the one who said you trade a guy before it's too late, not after it's too late. And I don't know if they would have traded Pee Wee because he was one of the faces of the franchise, but they certainly would have been searching more aggressively for a replacement, a younger replacement. And that guy would have been, because of the Dodger farm system, would have been Don Zimmer. And Don Zimmer, who we affectionately remember when he was a coach for Joe Torre on the New York Yankees bench. He and Jeter were great friends, and we also remember a brawl up in Fenway Park where he approached Pedro Martinez, and Martinez rolled him over on the grass. Didn't punch him, but rolled him over on the grass. And those are the things that most people remember because they're not as old as we are. But being old as we are, we remember Don Zimmer when he wasn't round and 100 pounds overweight. We remember him built. He had arms like Popeye. That was one of his nicknames when he came up. They called him Popeye because of his muscular arms, and he could really thump. He wasn't much of an average hitter, but he could hit the long ball, especially for a shortstop.
He had a little power, and he had doubles power too.
Yes, he did. And in that generation, he was what you would have to call a powerful hitter for a shortstop. Now, as time went on, we saw many, the game changed and blah, blah, blah. But let's stick with Don Zimmer for a second. And let me just give you a couple of facts that I learned throughout the years of being a Dodger fan. Don Zimmer was first beamed in the minor leagues when he played for the St. Paul Saints in 1953. He got hit in the head. Of course, there were no hard plastic helmets back then. And he got hit in the head. And when he woke up after being knocked unconscious, he thought that it was the same day as the game. He thought it was the nighttime of the ball game he had just played and got hit in the head with. Little did he know it was 13 days later, and he had brain surgery during that interval, those 13 days. What they did was they drilled 4 holes into his skull to release the pressure on his brain because his brain was getting bigger and bigger from the clout of, the ball hitting him in the head, and it was swelling and swelling, and he was near death's door when the doctor said, what we have to do, we don't really know what to do. Remember, this was 1953 now, and they drilled 4 holes into his skull to relieve the pressure. Well, when he woke up, they filled those holes with a second surgery with metal corkscrew-shaped buttons. So he never really had ever a metal plate in his head, like it was written many times. He only had those.
That was what I had assumed, and
yeah.
wow, I
Everybody
learned.
assumes that.
I asked you to teach me something, and sure enough, you did. That's
Well,
terrific.
if there's one
knowledge.
thing, yeah, well, if there's one little bit of knowledge I possess during my lifetime, I would have to say it's the Brooklyn Dodgers. Not that it's going to make me a penny ever or ever did, but anyway, no, it doesn't. But there were 4 metal corkscrew-shaped buttons stuck into those holes, and when Zimmer was in baseball professional baseball for 65 years, from 1949 until his death. Whether it be as a player, a coach, a manager, and we'll talk about that, or a front office guy. 65 years.
He said he never worked a day in his life. He
never worked a day in his life because he loved what he did. But you know what? After a while, Don Zimmer went along with the stories about the metal plate in his head. He tried to explain it early on that it wasn't a metal plate at all, because the second time he got beamed, he shattered his cheekbone, which didn't necessitate a metal plate either, and that was in the major leagues later on. But he did have those 4 metal corkscrew-shaped buttons put into the holes that they drilled in. And he played for the Dodgers. He later played for the Cubs. He played for the Mets. He played for the Reds. And he played for the Senators. Now, that was at the end of his career, major league career, Senators. He caught, did not play shortstop, caught 33 games for those Senators. And in 1966, he went to Japan and played a year over in Japan in '66. He was, like I said, he was beamed in '53 in the minors. He had the brain surgery, and he woke up 13 days later. And Major League Baseball made helmets mandatory after Zimmer's excruciating problem. And they weren't, not all of them were helmets as you and I and our listening audience know, like today, those big plastic helmets.
Liners.
They were liners. Right. Willie Mays wore a liner. Carl Furillo wore a liner. Roy Campanella wore a liner.
I was going to say, and their caps looked really funny, as if couldn't they get better caps than that? They looked worn out, out of shape, but that's because they had the liner in it a lot of times.
Yeah, they had little pockets inside, and they put these plastic walls, if you want to call them that, in there. They were inserted in there, and they made the cap stick out and bulge out a little bit on the sides. But the first real helmet, and this might not be true, because the old joke is, I read this on the internet, so it must be true, and then everyone laughs. But I did read this on the internet, so take it for what it's worth. Phil Rizzuto wore the first helmet, the first helmet in New York baseball. Now, you know what? I had many, many, many occasions to talk to Phil Rizzuto. We used to meet at the Dunkin' Donuts in Hillside when I was on my way to teach right across the line in Newark, and we used to get our coffee together, and we spoke of many things, but I never, and he never, brought up the helmet subject, and it would have been great if I could have asked him about that, and he could have filled me in that he, in fact, was the first New York ball player to wear a full-size batting helmet. Anyway, be that as it may, he also was a manager, Don Zimmer was. He managed the Padres.
Red Sox.
He managed the Red Sox. He managed the Rangers, and he managed the Cubs. He won 2 World Series rings, 1955 and 1959, both with the Dodgers. The first with Brooklyn, the second with Los Angeles.
Didn't realize
And
he had gone out to L.A. with them. Yeah, I guess he did because he didn't come to the Mets.
yeah, he did.
But,
Yes, he
but
did.
directly
Yep.
from the Dodgers, right?
Yes. He actually was traded to the Cubs, and the Cubs traded him to the Mets.
Oh, okay. Okay.
All right.
Well, they
like
let
I
him
said,
go in the expansion draft.
something like that. Yes, along those
Yeah.
lines. Yes. And he had a horrendous time as a Met. He was like 0 for 20 something, and they gave him to the Reds. I just want to mention
they traded him for Cliff Cook, who had a
there you go, Cliff Cook, number one.
yes.
Even though I said this already, I want to say it one more time. In his final season as a player, he actually was a catcher for the Washington Senators. He caught 33
That's amazing
games.
because he didn't catch at all during his career that I recall. And, wow. And this is 4 years after being terrible with the Mets. So he found a way, and another year in Japan. He found a way to make money for a long time in baseball.
Yes, he did.
Then get into coaching and what have you. He became a lovable, gerbil-like, gremlin little character, but he wasn't that when he played. He was a hard-nosed stickler, hustler and what I call an overachiever, a guy like, given his head injury especially.
Yeah.
Robbie Thompson, guys that just played better, Eddie Stanky, that they find ways to win beyond their statistics and play well in the big games. And he did give them depth at shortstop behind Reese over the years. So it wasn't like his career was totally destroyed by the injury. But I wonder just how highly he was touted. I heard that he was really on his way up with a bullet, that kind of thing. Is that right, or was he just?
Yeah, you're right. He wasn't. It's funny. It's funny you should put it that way. He was highly touted. He was the heir apparent. He was the next in line. He was the promise of the future. And you know what? Almost immediately, when he didn't work out and he didn't step in and become a perennial all-star or a 300 hitter, he was replaced by the Dodger scouting system with Chico Fernandez. Chico Fernandez was so highly touted by the Brooklyn Dodgers, it wasn't even funny. They thought Chico Fernandez was the best thing since ice cream was invented. He was supposed to be just the most phenomenal thing. And you want to know something? Here's the giveaway of what people thought about Chico Fernandez. He's from Cuba, by the way. Mm-hmm. Chico Fernandez was so highly thought of that even after he, whatever you want to call it, broke in with the Dodgers, although Reese gave not an inch, the Dodgers traded Chico Fernandez to the Philadelphia Phillies. And it's amazing. They got 5 players for Chico Fernandez plus $75,000, which is nothing to sneeze at in 1957. One of the 5 players was Elmer Vallow. Another one of the players was Tim Harkness, who would become a semi-star later in the 60s. But Chico Fernandez
became a Met, and you couldn't call him a star.
Yes, he did. No, he was never a star. Although he did have 1 year where he hit 20 home runs.
Oh, really? But, I didn't know that.
Yes.
It wasn't 63, I can tell you that.
No, it was 1962 with the Detroit Tigers. He won.
Harkness?
He won. No. Chico Fernandez, who also
Oh,
played for the Yankees.
Fernandez was terrific with the Tiger. I thought you were talking about Harkness. Yeah, Fernandez
No.
was terrific.
Yeah.
Those 2 or 3 years when they were in contention with the Yankees,
Yeah.
I think it was McAuliffe or Jake Woods or one of those guys. Jake Woods was the second baseman, and
Yeah.
they were very, very good together. I don't know how Philadelphia gave him up to Detroit. What do you happen to know?
I don't know how that went down. He didn't do very well with Philadelphia. His batting average slumped down. He was only 240 lifetime. But he, like I said, he was traded for 5 players by the Dodgers got 5 players for him and $75,000. So they didn't think he was a chump when they traded him. The Phillies didn't think so. And the Dodgers held out for that and they got it. He stole home his claim to fame, or so he said, when he was inducted into the Cuban Baseball Hall of Fame in 1997. Chico Fernandez said that the most exciting thing that happened to him in baseball was in 1961 as a Detroit Tiger. He stole home in the 9th inning at Yankee Stadium against the Yankees.
Wow.
Straight steal of home.
Wow. Those Sunday games when Paul would come in and hit a home run against the Yankees.
Sunday
Charlie
puncher.
Maxwell.
Paul Maxwell. Yeah.
Right. Those were some great years. It was right before the Mets were born. We had lost the Giants and Dodgers, and we were
Yes.
floundering the baseball. I mean, it was
Yes.
anything that looked, the uniform looked good. I'll be a Brave fan for a minute. 2 birds on the bat. I love the Cardinals. Go Stan Musial.
Right.
That doesn't last because unless you grow up with a team, it's really hard to adopt a team. Like
it was
tough. Easy for me coming out to live in California. The Giants were here, and although I had become a Met fan, I could still give allegiance to the Giants out here because they were the New York Giants at one time, and I rooted for them at that time. But as hard as I tried, I could never give true allegiance. You were able to do that with the Red Sox.
Well, I tried to explain that to you and our listening audience about a year and a half ago when I all of a sudden saw, it was like an epiphany. I saw all of the stars aligning, like the Dodgers, the Brooklyn Dodgers were in so many ways like the Boston Red Sox. And I'll go through it real quick, if I may.
Please.
The same stadium. Only left field was right field at Ebbets Field. It was a very high wall, 38 to 40 feet high in right field, and the Green Monster is 38 to 40 feet high in the left field. They had no parking whatsoever around the ballpark. They only had 32,000 seats. They both wore a B on their caps. They both had unbelievable histories of way, way up and way, way down. They had heartbreaking defeats at the end of seasons. They had fans who spoke in a funny accent. They aligned perfectly for me. Absolutely perfectly.
Except for one thing.
Go ahead.
And you can tell me, because I thought this thing through, being 11, 12, 13 years old, 14, 1,000 times with the different teams and the history, Bill Veeck and this and Eddie Goodell. Should I be a Baltimore fan? St. Louis history. I mean, all these things. The one thing. The Red Sox worked out 2 players early on in the 50s, maybe in the late 40s, Jackie and Willie. And because of the way things were with Yorkie, who the buck always stops here. I remember listening to Harry Truman say that. And if that racist pig represented the top of it, Not that Stoneham or O'Malley or anything were pieces of cake, but that's what they passed it on. Cronin and Pinky Higgins and all these white racist Southern guys that put their hatred over. I mean, they didn't see what Willie and or Jackie could do to baseball, to that franchise, to humanity, and that's what it was with the Red Sox. Although I've taken my turn around the league, rooting them on at times, that always got to me. That was it for me. But,
yeah, that's a big thing. They also had Pee Wee Reese at a time, and fumbled him away.
I didn't know that. I didn't remember.
Yeah. The Red Sox.
At the end of the beginning.
No, in the very beginning, in 1939 or something like that, they had Reese. And the Dodgers, the way I hear the story told, the Dodgers bought an entire farm club from Yawkey just to get Reese. Because he wouldn't give up Reese. He gave up an entire club. They bought a whole club, all 25 guys and a manager, just to get Pee Wee Reese. But, you know, the Red Sox also had a gigantic, feverish hatred for the New York Yankees, which I, of course, had, being a Brooklyn Dodger fan. So I could latch on to the Red Sox a little bit easier. To tell you the truth, I really didn't bring the racial thing into the equation. Mentioning it now, looking back on it, yes. Being there then, I didn't ever read, when I was 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 years old, I never read those
then.
things.
A lot of it is looking back, absolutely.
Yeah, right.
Yep. But
just like, people say to me, very young people, Ralph, very young people say to me, how could you have loved John F. Kennedy so much? He was a philanderer. He cheated on his wife. I said, back in that era, no one knew that. We didn't know that until after he was dead and buried for 10, 15 years. That didn't come out until later, and then it was all innuendo and rumor and gossip and the Inquirer type of headlines and stuff like that. When you're
but there was stuff like that about Eisenhower and his drive overseas. FDR and him fucking around.
Especially when you're young like we were. We were young back in those days. We didn't know anything about the gossip stuff and about the stories being whispered back and forth about, what might have been happening and stuff. God only knows. I never knew about Leo Durocher was married to a woman who didn't have her divorce from the first husband yet, and that he was a bigamist and the Catholic Church was against him in Brooklyn, and that led to his being fired and suspended.
And she was a Mormon too, and
I never knew any of that until I was grown up and read about it. Back then, as a fan, you didn't know that stuff.
Right.
At least I didn't.
Yeah, I was a big Leo fan because 51, my first year going out there. 54, he wins it all and symbolized the Giants and Willie. I read a book by Zansky, I can't think of his first name, about Leo Durocher. He was one of the most despicable human beings that ever lived. I mean, it's all an era thing. I think he set the bar pretty low, but today there's a lot more despicable people than Leo Durocher. But he was not a good person in any way, shape, or form. Yet you could read his book, and it's told a different way, and he's a colorful storytelling guy and all this. You got to judge him as we do entertainers and politicians. Basically, I mean, you look at Ted Kennedy. You can say he was a wonderful liberal who did wonderful things in the Senate, but as a human being, you can say, wow, you know, the things with his nephew, Mary Jo Kopechne, all of that makes for not a good human. But how do you judge a person in the shades of gray? That's how you. Nothing is black or white. And to complete your thought about John Kennedy, we were wrapped up in Camelot. I mean, that was just the American dream. He was going to change things. In 1960, we were going to get Grim Nixon over a man with charisma, with a beautiful wife, with all the things that had going, and with you know, could stand up to Khrushchev and all of that. We didn't know anything else, you know, and we didn't know Bobby. Bobby, as wonderful as he was in some ways, sat on McCarthy's commission. He was a lawyer for McCarthy.
Anti-communist,
Yeah, right. He was also heavily involved in philandering, if you will, which can be a full-time job and not a bad job with benefits. But, but I can't really blame the man. It's not something, you know, there's a certain amount of envy, for crying out loud, just that goes on. But anyway, what can I tell you?
Bobby got very liberal after his brother was shot and killed in Dallas. He started to become a loner. He started reading Aeschylus. He started walking on the beach alone, doing a lot of deep thoughts, and he came out of that very progressive and very liberal. And I know, you know, our audience hears the word liberal like it's a dirty word, and it's gotten a very bad rap. He was a progressive. He had the balls to be in Alabama and tell the group, this is before the internet and before cell phones and before cable TV. He announced to a large crowd, 100% of which were black. He told them that Martin Luther King had been shot and killed. And he had balls. Bobby Kennedy had balls, big iron balls. And he gains my respect and never lost a shred of it. His legacy will always be rock solid with me. He used to say to people like George Wallace and the like, the Southern boys and everything, he used to say, let me ask you a question. He said, you know, with all your religion and all your churches and all your Bibles and all that stuff, suppose God is black. And he used to stop them right on a dime.
Right.
Now, what this has to do with Pee Wee Reese, Chico Fernandez, and Don Zimmer, I'll never know. But it's always a pleasure to talk with you because we just talk about everything, and it's wonderful. It really is.
All right.
I'm sorry that I went off course so far, but I just had to get that out.
I've gone off course for 70 years now, and I'm going on 71, so don't worry about staying on course. We got plenty of time to get back to it. We'll do it in the future and keep doing it.
Yeah, it's a wonderful thing. It's a great opportunity, and I've thanked you personally in person, on the phone.
Oh, yeah. You don't have to
messaging,
and
I thank you on the air. I thank you on the air, even getting me involved in this, because initially I hesitated, as you well remember. Didn't think that I would be good at this, and didn't think that I would be interested in it. And I would be too nervous, and I would be this and that. I thought of every negative thing in the book.
You didn't even want to grant me an interview, and I recognized you as the #1 Dodger historian that I ever met. You know, and the fact that we were born in the same year, and so we had the same perspective of it,
Yeah.
looking at it from an 11-year-old. I know how you thought as an 11-year-old, because I thought the same way. And this has been a pleasure. I'm glad you had me back, and we'll get Bernie and Linda in here this winter, and we'll get through the hot stove stuff and the really Jones baseball. It's difficult. What do you do to Jones? Do you have your trains as another passion going?
Yeah, I have my model trains. But I'm very passionate about baseball, and I'm a 12-month guy. I'm not one of those guys where when the World Series is over, I forget all about it and I jump to a football club. And I don't do that. I count the days to spring training. I celebrate that the Mets re-signed Cespedes. I'm on top of it all. I love it. I love it.
That happened today, and that was a nice thing. We could talk about the Giants and Dodgers, but occasionally we talk about the Mets too. And it was
why
nice
not? New York baseball.
Absolutely, and I enjoy it. So we'll do it same time next week, same place.
We will. We'll do it. We'll do it next week. We'll be in touch.
And next week we have Ron Liebman coming on. He's going to give us some Dodger trivia.
Great.
He's one of the all-time mavens in trivia, and he's been on the station before, and he looks forward to it, and I look forward to having him. And it's good to be back with Peter.
Thank you very much for coming on with me. I appreciate it very much.
All right. Thank you, and we'll see you next week.
Yes. Thank you. Good night.
Good night.